how can we help foster the public-private partnerships, bringing American capital and expertise and standards to Africa so that we can keep exploiting, so that we can exploring where we can get these minerals.
U.S.-China relations took a pretty dramatic turn for the worse this week. On Friday, President Trump took to social media to lay into China about, quote-unquote, becoming very hostile, referring to the announcement from the Chinese government earlier this week that it would increase export restrictions and controls on rare earth materials.
The world didn't see this one coming. For decades, Africa's minerals have powered the global economy, but not the African dream. From the chips inside your phone to the magnets that drive fighter jets, satellites, and electric vehicles, Africa's earth made it all possible. Yet when the profits came, Africa got crumbs. And the world called it fair trade, but not anymore. Because last month, quietly, without the Western media spotlight, a group of African nations signed an agreement that could change global power forever. They restricted the export of rare earth minerals, the same minerals the United States, the UK, and Canada depend on for everything from missiles to microchips. And here's what makes it historic: it wasn't a protest. It was a declaration of power. For years, Western companies dug deep into African soil, shipping tons of unprocessed ore to Asia and Europe. They called it investment, but what they were really doing was stripping Africa of its technological future. See, raw ore is cheap, but refined rare earths, those shiny little metals used in advanced tech, are worth hundreds of times more. For every dollar Africa earned, foreign refiners made 100. That's how the global system was designed. Africa mines, the world profits. But something changed. Africa got tired. Tired of digging holes and calling it growth. Tired of watching its minerals turn billionaires elsewhere. So the continent made a move the world never expected: no more exports without value. From Burundi to Tanzania, from Malawi to South Africa, leaders gathered under one principle: that the era of raw export is over. And make no mistake, this isn't a symbolic gesture. It's strategic, because rare earth minerals are not just resources, they are the foundation of modern civilization. Without them, there are no smartphones, no wind turbines, no defense systems, no AI. Without Africa's minerals, there is no modern world. So when Africa says no more, it's not rebellion, it's a reset. And the West, they didn't see it coming. Their analysts were watching oil markets, inflation rates, and stock indices. But not Africa's awakening. They never believed Africa would have the unity or the courage to disrupt the supply chains that their economies depend on. They thought Africa would keep begging for aid while giving away its future. But this time, Africa had a plan written in policy, powered by ambition, and fueled by one unshakable truth: the minerals belong to the people, not the corporations, not the donors, not the development partners. The people, the movement, began quietly: mining reforms in Namibia and Zimbabwe, a processing initiative in Malawi, industrialization policies in Tanzania. Each small step looked isolated until the dots connected. Behind the scenes, the African Union's mining task force was drafting something bigger: a continental framework for mineral value addition, a blueprint to say, if you want Africa's minerals, you build the factories here, you train our people here, you share the profits here. And that's when the alarms went off in Washington, London, and Ottawa, because the truth is, Africa doesn't need permission to rise, it only needs control of what's already hers. Supply chain disruption, defense industry at risk, global tech faces shortage. Those are the headlines flashing across Western media now. They call it a crisis. But for Africa, it's justice, because for once the world is feeling what Africa has felt for centuries: dependence. For once, they're the ones asking, what do we do if Africa stops supplying? The answer is simple: they adapt. Because this time, Africa isn't shutting the world out, it's inviting the world in under new terms. And here's the part nobody's talking about. This move didn't just happen in isolation, it's part of a global strategy, and Africa is aligning with new power blocks. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are quietly building a resource network outside Western control. Now Africa's rare earth restrictions make that alliance even stronger, because if China controls processing and Africa controls supply, then the US and Europe control nothing. And that's the real story. The world isn't facing a mineral shortage, it's facing a power shift. Africa's move may sound technical, just export restrictions, but look deeper. It's the first time the continent is saying, collectively, we are not your raw material warehouse. It's the start of something bigger: economic sovereignty. The right to decide how Africa's wealth is used, who benefits from it, and what future it builds. It's no longer about independence from colonial rule. That was political freedom. This is economic freedom, and that's what the world never saw coming. Every empire in history depended on resources it didn't own. Europe had Africa. America had oil. But now, as the world turns to electric power and artificial intelligence, Africa holds the key materials that drive both. This isn't revenge, it's realignment, and the message is clear. You can't build the future without Africa, not anymore. So when you hear Western leaders talk about supply chain resilience, remember, what they really mean is fear. Fear that the days of free access are over. Fear that Africa is learning how the system works and how to flip it. Because the moment Africa decided to stop exporting raw wealth, it stopped being a supplier and became a player, and the world didn't see it coming.
When China banned rare earth exports, the world panicked. But this time, it's not Beijing pulling the plug, it's Africa. From Burundi to Malawi, from South Africa to Tanzania, the continent that quietly holds over 20% of the world's untapped rare earth minerals has just said, no more exports without value, and that one move could shake the foundations of Western tech, defense, and energy systems. Because every missile guidance system, every smartphone, every electric vehicle battery, all of them depend on the elements Africa just decided to control. And here's the twist. This wasn't a protest. It was a strategy. Across the globe, headlines are spinning. Africa follows China's footsteps. The new mineral alliance? US and UK supply chains at risk. But on the ground in Africa, the story is very different. In Dar es Salaam, government officials and mining executives quietly signed a pact that changes the rules forever, a continental framework for rare earth processing. Instead of shipping raw minerals abroad for pennies, Africa wants to build its own refineries, its own factories, and its own technology sector. In short, Africa is tired of being the world's quarry, and this time it's not just about economics, it's about power. Let's break this down. Rare earth minerals like neodymium, dysprosium, and terbium are essential for everything from fighter jets to wind turbines. For decades, the West got these materials through global supply chains dominated by China, but Africa's deposits, especially in Burundi, Malawi, and South Africa, are some of the richest on Earth. Yet 90% of African rare earth exports were going to foreign processors, mostly in Asia and Europe. That meant billions lost in potential value and total dependency on foreign buyers. Now African leaders are saying, we'll mine it, we'll refine it, and we'll sell it on our terms. Behind the scenes, the African Union's Mining Task Force has been developing a rare earth value addition policy, a quiet revolution that got almost no Western media coverage. It pushes for local refining and processing plants, export taxes on unprocessed minerals, partnerships only with nations investing in African infrastructure. In other words, no more free rides. The move is being called Africa's Resource Sovereignty Act, and it's catching Western corporations completely off guard. The US, UK, and Canada are now racing to diversify supply chains, but there's a catch. You can't diversify what you don't have. Africa controls massive untapped deposits of 17 rare earth elements, and for decades, the West ignored them, thinking Africa would never take charge. But now, with China tightening its own exports and Africa following suit, the two biggest sources of these critical minerals are no longer freely open. Analysts are calling it the start of the global resource rebellion. One African energy minister put it best, for 200 years, our land powered empires. Now it's time our land powers Africans. Western defense officials are worried because rare earths aren't just about gadgets. They're in jet engines, laser systems, satellites, and nuclear reactors. Losing access means losing a strategic. Some reports suggest Western countries have already started pressuring African governments through diplomatic channels, offering aid and trade deals to soften the restrictions. But the African bloc is holding firm. According to leaked AU memos, several countries including South Africa, Namibia, and Tanzania are considering forming a rare earth export alliance similar to OPEC. And if that happens, Africa won't just be a supplier anymore, it will be a price setter. Picture it, an African-led alliance deciding the global price of the materials that power the modern world. That means the next iPhone, the next electric vehicle, even the next generation of AI chips could all depend on African decisions. For decades, Africa's natural wealth was its curse. Today, it's becoming its weapon of leverage. From Kinshasa to Lilong, leaders are realizing something powerful. Controlling your minerals means controlling your destiny. So when you hear Western leaders talk about supply chain resilience, what they really mean is this: they no longer control the source. Africa does, and this time the world didn't see it coming. Africa didn't stumble into this moment. This move restricting rare earth exports has been years in the making. It started quietly in closed-door meetings across Addis Ababa, Harare, and Kinshasa, where ministers, geologists, and economists were asking the same question. How long will we keep selling gold for the price of sand? Behind those questions came a blueprint, a vision to finally break the chain of dependency that has defined Africa's role in the global market for over a century. And at the center of that vision were two words that now define a new era: value addition. Value addition, it sounds like a business term, but in Africa, it's a revolution. It means no more exporting raw ore. No more watching foreign firms ship African minerals overseas, refine them, and sell them back to the continent at 200 times the price. It means Africa builds its own factories, its own refineries, its own technology. And to make that happen, a quiet alliance was born linking mining nations like Tanzania, Namibia, and Malawi, with financial powerhouses like Egypt, South Africa, and Nigeria. Their goal? To create a network of African rare earth industrial zones, backed by regional banks and sovereign wealth funds, not foreign loans. The turning point came in 2023 when the Afreximbank launched its $1.5 billion Critical Minerals Fund. Officially, it was to support beneficiation projects. But behind the jargon, it was Africa's first coordinated financial weapon to take control of the global mineral supply chain. With that fund, African nations could build processing plants, metallurgical labs, and industrial parks owned and run by Africans. The message was clear: we won't be your raw material suppliers, we'll be your competitors. And while Western investors hesitated, BRICS nations stepped in. In Beijing, Delhi, and Moscow, analysts saw the shift coming. Africa wasn't begging for aid anymore. It was demanding industrial partnerships. China, which already faced U.S. sanctions over its own rare earth policies, saw an opportunity. It offered joint refineries, technology transfer agreements, and infrastructure deals that didn't come with political lectures. India followed, seeking rare earth contracts in Rwanda and Kenya, positioning itself as the democratic alternative to Chinese influence. And Russia, always strategic, proposed a Pan-African mineral reserve system, a BRICS-backed platform where Africa could sell rare earths directly to member states without using the US dollar. That's when Washington realized this wasn't just a trade issue. It was a power shift. Inside Western boardrooms, defense contractors worried about their missile guidance systems. Tech giants warned of production slowdowns. Suddenly, Africa, long dismissed as resource-rich but poor, had something far more valuable: leverage. In one leaked TU report, analysts called Africa's rare earth consolidation a direct threat to European industrial stability, but in African circles it was seen as justice. After decades of extraction, exploitation, and export imbalance, the continent was finally setting the terms of engagement. If they want our minerals, one Tanzanian official said, they'll have to invest in our factories, hire our youth, and respect our terms. Across the continent, the transformation is visible. In Malawi, a new rare earth separation plant has begun pilot production, the first of its kind in sub-Saharan Africa. In Namibia, a government-backed project aims to build an industrial corridor connecting mines to coastal ports, complete with processing facilities. And in Burundi, one of the smallest countries in Africa, international experts are shocked. It's quietly becoming a rare earth processing hub for Central Africa. The symbolism is powerful: small nations standing tall, turning natural wealth into geopolitical muscle. For the first time in modern history, Africa is exporting refined value, not just raw potential. But make no mistake, this new strategy has enemies. Western media calls it resource nationalism. Investment funds are warning of rising risks in African mining. Yet Africans call it by another name: self-respect. And while critics fear instability, the real fear in Western capitals is different. It's that Africa's model might work. Because if it does, every resource-producing region from South America to Southeast Asia could follow suit. Imagine a world where Africa sets the benchmark price for rare earths, Latin America does the same for lithium, and the Middle East for oil. That's not just a shift. That's the end of Western economic dominance. So what? Sources inside the African Union say plans are underway for a Pan-African minerals exchange, a digital marketplace that would allow countries to trade rare earths, gold, and lithium in local or BRICS currencies. If launched, it would be the final piece of the puzzle the moment Africa stops being a resource supplier and becomes a global resource broker. The West may have satellites, banks, and media power, but Africa now has the one thing everyone needs, and it's finally learning how to use it. The world is watching nervously. They used to call Africa the sleeping giant, but what they didn't expect was that when Africa finally woke up, it wouldn't just stand, it would negotiate. And this time, the terms are African. The question is no longer whether Africa will rise. The question is, How will the world adapt when it does? The news hit Western capitals like a thunderclap. In Washington, emergency task forces were assembled. In London and Ottawa, officials scrambled to assess what the new African export controls meant for their industries. The reaction was one word: panic. For decades, the West treated Africa's minerals as an open buffet, no restrictions, no consequences. But now that buffet just closed. And the chefs are African. Overnight, prices of critical minerals surged. Tech companies began warning of delays in everything from EV batteries to advanced radar systems. Defense analysts called it the most serious supply disruption since the Cold War. Western media tried to spin the story. Headlines screamed about resource nationalism and risk to global markets. But deep down, even they knew the truth: Africa had simply flipped the script. For the first time in history, the continent wasn't waiting for permission. It was making the rules. And those rules came with a message: if you want our minerals, come build with us, not on us. Across African capitals, leaders stood united not in rebellion but in self-definition. From Lusaka to Lilong, the message echoed: Africa is not a charity case. Africa is a global supplier with conditions. The pushback began immediately. Western lobbyists pressured governments to reconsider the new restrictions. Aid packages suddenly came with fine print about open market policies. Even the IMF and World Bank quietly began re-evaluating funding programs for countries imposing export limits. But the mood in Africa had changed. Decades of dependency had hardened into something else: unity through defiance. And Africa's young population, the generation that grew up online, educated and globally aware, wasn't buying the old narratives anymore. They saw through the politics. They knew Africa was finally playing the global game on its own terms. In a dramatic twist, the African Union unveiled a new initiative, the African Rare Earth Alliance Area, a continental body designed to coordinate policies, standardize pricing, and negotiate as one bloc. Within weeks, 8 nations, including South Africa, Namibia, Tanzania, Burundi, and Malawi, signed on. Area's goal is simple but revolutionary: no more underpricing, no more unequal contracts, no more raw exports without local beneficiation. Its headquarters? Addis Ababa, the same city where the African Union was born. The symbolism couldn't be clearer. The continent that was once carved up by foreign powers is now carving out its own destiny. As Area took shape, another surprise unfolded. The BRICS bloc, now expanded with new African members, proposed a digital minerals exchange, a blockchain-based marketplace where African countries could sell rare earths directly to global buyers in BRICS currencies or the Pan-African Payment System (PAPS). No US dollar, no Western intermediaries, just Africa trading with the world on equal footing. For Western financial systems, it was a nightmare scenario, a massive resource market operating outside their control. But for Africa, it was liberation, a declaration of independence in the digital age. And the effects were immediate. Tech giants began quietly approaching African governments to negotiate joint ventures. Japanese and Korean firms offered to build processing facilities inside Africa. Even European companies, once skeptical, began pitching partnership deals that included local job guarantees. For the first time in living memory, Africa had leverage at the negotiation table. The continent that had always been invited to global discussions was now hosting them. As one African economist said on live TV, they used to send ambassadors to tell us what to do. Now they send CEOs to ask what we want, but not everyone is celebrating. Some warn of internal risks, corruption, mismanagement, and political divisions that could undermine the dream. Others fear that external powers might exploit old tactics, debt traps, coups, or disinformation campaigns to destabilize key nations. Yet, something is different this time. Africa is connected digitally, economically, and politically in ways it never was before. The African Continental Free Trade Area, PAPS, and now Area together, they form an invisible shield, economic unity as a defense mechanism. Africa may still face challenges, but it finally has a weapon it never had before: collective control of its resources. For centuries, the world defined Africa by what it lacked, but history has a funny way of turning. The minerals that once made Africa a victim of exploitation are now the same elements making it a global power player. Rare earths, lithium, cobalt, gold, the very materials that fuel tomorrow's technology sit beneath African soil. And this time, Africa is not selling dreams. It's selling access. Slowly, the narrative is shifting. From resource-rich, power-poor, to resource-rich, power-secure. Western leaders talk of building resilience, But what they really mean is, we don't control Africa anymore, and that's the beauty of it. Because Africa was never meant to be controlled. It was meant to lead on its own terms. The world once asked, can Africa rise? But the question is outdated. Africa has already risen quietly, strategically, and unapologetically. The rare earth revolution is just the beginning. A new era has started where the resources that built empires will now build Africa itself. So when you hear the words made in Africa, remember this moment, because it all began when Africa decided not to sell its minerals but to own its future.